That was also another aha moment I had for myself is I thought you went to college and you got the degree and then that was the job you had. I'm going to be an aerospace engineer, so I did a degree in aerospace engineering, or I want to be an industrial engineer, I want to get a degree in industrial engineering. And I think that's kind of what, I mean, maybe I was a little bit naive or didn't really think it all through, but yeah, I mean, that's a credential, that's a learning experience you have, but that doesn't mean that's who you are or that's what job you have to do. And how do you take those skills that you have, whether it's from a degree or from a volunteer experience or wherever it's from? How can you apply that to something that excites you, that you're passionate about, and that, by the way, somebody will pay you for? And that's not always necessarily the same thing as those words that are on your degree.
My prediction is just like we have gyms that we have to go to build our bodies because we don't have to do manual work for the most part, most people don't. I think we're going to have emotional gyms because a lot of the things that AI might take over if we're not careful of, we're going to lose all those skills, but they're inherently human. So we need them. And there's going to be, I don't know what the emotional gym is going to look like, but that's my prediction. It could be in the next 5 years, some sort of emotional gym to make sure we're still good.
Turn this up, turn this up.
Your professional development is one of the keys to your career success. When you combine your desire to grow with actionable steps, your journey to success becomes an incredible reality.
Hi, I'm Paul Ferrandi, aka IncrediPaul, and welcome to IncrediPaul Leadership, where I talk to incredible people doing incredible things so we can become the most incredible versions of ourselves. First off, thank you so much for listening to this episode. But I also want you to know you can also watch this episode on YouTube. Regardless of if you're listening or watching, really appreciate your support. Today, I have the honor of having Chris Whaley on the show. Chris is a collaboration engineer helping organizations deliver results through team engagement. He's a speaker, coach, and facilitator with over 20 years of experience in project management and HR. He also has multiple degrees in engineering, which I'm sure we'll get into that. But that was just a little bit about you, Chris. So how about you introduce yourself the way you would do it?
Thanks very much, Paul. Again, great to be speaking to you. The IncrediPaul. So thank you for that. I need to. I don't have a branding team, so I'm going to have to workshop some
Okay, I
names
can
for
help
Chris.
you with that. We'll work on it.
Oh, great. But no, I appreciate the introduction. Yeah, actually, I started off in engineering, and where that came from was, okay, I'm a little older. I'm from the '70s, so I fell in love with Star Wars when it first came out. The original Star Wars, 1977. I was still young, but that was probably the first movie that made a big impact on me. And I loved, of course, the starships and the technology, but then there was the story, and in the end, the good guys win. I think that really kind of kicked that early love of science fiction, but I also liked math and things like that and science. And so I thought early on, hey, I want to be an aerospace engineer. I want to help build the future so we can do some fun things like that. And so out of high school, went straight to University of Tennessee in Knoxville and jumped into that aerospace engineering degree. I did get that degree, but at that time, the whole aerospace industry was kind of collapsing a little bit and shrinking, and the hiring wasn't going the way I was hoping it was going to go. And so I thought, maybe, put those young ideas to the side. Maybe I need to diversify a little bit. And so I went ahead and got my master's degree in industrial engineering. And, if you're an engineer, in aerospace, we always called the IEs the imaginary engineers because, they're not having to do thermodynamics. They don't have to do finite element analysis.
Oh, man.
That's the easy stuff. As I started getting into industrial engineering, I started figuring out, wow, that's actually the most complicated type of engineering because it's not just systems and tools and processes, because a lot of times there is a right answer for those things. There's one way this works, one way the space shuttle takes off. There's one way, we make a landing. But when you're looking at systems that involve people, there's usually not one single right answer. And that, to me, is really what industrial engineering, what I started calling intelligence engineering, was around. So now I can't make fun of, I still reference myself an imaginary engineer from time to time, but that it is really so much more complexity, but also so much more you can do when you're thinking of systems of people along with those processes and tools and technology. And so I really felt good about making that switch, even though I then thought, wow, I spent a lot of time, doing, fluid mechanics and things I probably ended up didn't need to do, but it was a good experience. So I had a couple of jobs out of school. I actually worked as a crime analyst for a few years at the Knoxville Police Department. So I put those statistic training to good use. Was a volunteer firefighter during a lot of my college years for about a decade, and I can come back to that later. But I actually ended up figuring out that there's a lot of things I learned about leadership as a firefighter that I really didn't recognize at the time until I started looking back on my career. But maybe we can come back to that one later. After a few jobs, I ended up moving into Philips, at that time Consumer Electronics, and that's a big global company, over 100 countries. They were a global leader in lighting, so light bulbs, Philips lighting, also medical devices, and then consumer electronics, at that time televisions, shavers, all kinds of things. And what attracted me there was it was a big global company. So I thought, oh, there's going to be lots of opportunity for growth. They're in different technologies, different locations again. And that actually worked out to be true. So I started as a knowledge engineer, just working in the service organization, and got into project management. And from there, got into process improvement and business transformation, and started getting assigned to HR projects. And eventually, after a few years, I got to move to Amsterdam and work in the headquarters there for a few years, and came back and finished up about 10 years in the healthcare division in HR. So just kind of over time, those engineering skills and the technical background and that systems thinking, I had moved into different roles, and ended up in HR, which is not something I would have ever thought of. But it was really interesting to see. And that's why now on my LinkedIn, I hang that collaboration engineer. I don't know anywhere you can get a degree in collaboration engineering, but to me, it's it is a kind of a fun combination of what I learned in engineering and what I learned in HR. And then after I left Philips, I thought, wow, I want to keep doing the work I love. And so that's why I do facilitation, coaching, speaking, exactly around helping people come and work together better.
Wow. I was going to ask about the collaboration engineering because that's not something I don't know if I've seen it anywhere else before. And I was like, where'd you get that? But that is an incredible story. That there's a lot to unpack there, but I'm going to just summarize, at least from what you had shared, probably what the audience is thinking, that you went from literally rocket science, aerospace engineering, ended up in HR. Sound like you did everything in between, even volunteer firefighting, learn about leadership there. Were there any of those transitions that were more difficult than another, or maybe more memorable?
A great question. To me, the probably two stand out. So one was when I took that international assignment, because it wasn't so much about the job. It was, getting to live and work overseas. And to me, it's not just, oh, I've got to figure out a new job. It's, oh, I've got to figure out a new culture and all these other things. And I had moved around the US several times, so I knew how to pack up things and move things and change your address. So it was more around the culture and thinking, wow, I get to actually live and be part of another place. Highly recommend, if anybody gets a chance to live or work overseas, definitely take that opportunity, because at least for me, I saw some things that, of course, it made me miss the US for a lot of things. Wow, this works a lot better, or these things I love about the US. But it also opens your eyes that, maybe we don't always get everything right in the US. And sometimes, it's good to learn from others and hear different perspectives. So to me, that was a bit refreshing. And also to see that, some of the challenges we have here are the same challenges that people in other countries have. And then you kind of think, well, why can't we work together to solve some of these? But that's probably a whole nother podcast there.
Yeah, it could be a whole lot of it.
So that was the one was more because of the move itself. And I think my last corporate move, when I was kind of a staff role, senior director of organizational effectiveness, but I didn't really I had a small team, but I was very focused on kind of processes still. It was people related, but it was processes and getting things done. That last role I had though was as an HR business partner when I was at that vice president level. And that was really a huge step because I thought, okay, I know how all the HR stuff works. But there it really is you're translating what that leader needs as the CEO of that business or that company. And as far as they're concerned, I'm everything HR to them, even though I'm only know a certain part or I only have a few people. And so it really was a huge growth opportunity for me to have to put myself into a different position of, yeah, they expect me to go and make sure this is all done. I have to be a thought partner. I'm not just, playing in this one little sandbox. And so it was, I think, expansiveness of that. And then am I ready for that?
Okay, I see. So one was more focused on the role itself and how expansive it was, and the other one was very much the culture and the people aspect, it seems like.
I think so. I think
Yeah.
so.
And I know you do a lot of work with working with different teams and engagement, and making sure they're working together. Is there one or the other that you see more common that you're trying to help people with? Just like understanding their role within the team, or just being able to fit into a new culture or a new way of doing things?
A lot of things come down to communication, honestly. And it's, how are people communicating together or how are they not communicating together? In some cases. And there's a lot of other skills, being able to make effective decisions. And that's where I think the kind of the analytical background that you can have as an engineer can help, but it can also hold you back as well because sometimes we'll get that analysis paralysis. I need just a little bit more data. uh, You know, I'm not sure if this tells the whole story. Well, that's why it's called a decision. If all the facts were there, it would kind of be obvious and there's no decision needed. So that I think that, sometimes how people make decisions, why they make decisions, and communication is a big part of that. Did I talk to the right people? Did I get the right information? Am I involving them and am I doing the right things? And so I see a lot around kind of those two elements, but the communications I think is a big one.
That's a good point. I definitely agree with that. I think communication is one of those things that everyone thinks that they do a little bit better than they actually do. And
Absolutely.
it's one of those things that you have to look at yourself in the mirror and realize that you could think that you're communicating the best way possible, but if it's not being received well, then that means there's something that you're not doing that is not getting across to that person. And that's what all that matters at the end of the day.
It's so true. And I remember, like for me, instant messaging, whether it's Slack or whatever tool you're using, if if I need to reach out to somebody, I put, hey, can you please send me that slide from Tuesday? Thank you very much. In my mind, I'm being brief to the point. They know what I'm asking for. In my mind, I'm being very helpful. I'm respecting their time. But I talk to somebody else and they start off, hey, how you doing? And I'm thinking, just tell me, what do you want? You didn't just reach out to say, hey, how you doing? But, to them, that's an important step in the process. I want to recognize you as a person. And then, so learning how to adapt your own communication style to what other people want is something it took me a while to figure that one out.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, especially as leaders. I think if you're not, which everyone can be a leader and can be a person of influence, but if you're in a leadership position, I think it's really your responsibility to adapt to the communication of your team. I think a lot of times what I say is that leadership is hard because you can't lead everyone the same way and you have to fit to them as a leader. Like I very much believe in servant leadership. So your point is like trying to understand, okay, this person wants me to get direct to the point. The other person wants to have a conversation first. And you're only going to know that by getting to know them as a person and building that relationship.
Absolutely. And that's actually one of the tools that we teach teams is especially when they're forming and they're first getting together. It's let's talk about your communication preferences. Are you the kind of person, do you want to get a phone call? Do you want to get a text? Do you want to get a voice message? And of course, people are all around the board on, obviously, I know a lot of our generation alphas and those coming up, they're kind of scared of using the phone, don't want to use the phone, but that's not always the most effective way to communicate. But find out what those preferences are. Some people, I need to step out of work between 3 and 4 so I can go pick my kids up from school. So don't try to call me between 3 and 4. But if we need to have a call at 9 p.m. tonight, I'm all for it. Finding out what those preferences are, and you can't always honor the preferences, but at least you can try to accommodate those when you can.
Yeah. That's a good point that you can't always honor them, but that's the reason it's a preference. It's preferred. It's not a requirement. So it's not. And if it's a requirement, you need to make sure you're working at a place that aligns with those values that you have. I don't know, when you work with different teams, if sometimes there's a misalignment between the values of the leader versus the team, and if there's any sort of techniques or things you try to do to make sure that they understand what the values are for the team and for the individuals.
That's funny you mentioned that. Just working with a new client, and they actually have just defined some actually pretty strong values that they want to live as a company. And what I like is that they co-created those together. So it wasn't just the leader by themselves saying, here's what I think, we should be. It was that leadership team together saying, well, here's what we value. Here's what we don't want to see happen. Here's the behaviors that we want to live as a company. And so, I mean, that's kind of the best case scenario where they're talking about those and really trying to live those up front. On the other hand, you do get those situations where maybe the company has some values and people don't live by them. And then you have to start peeling back. Is it because maybe they don't understand the values, or maybe they are relating to the values in different ways? If I say, hey, we value trust and accountability, well, what does that really mean, though? Does that mean are you going to follow up with me to see if I did my job? Because that's accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, we said we were going to do this podcast, and so you're holding me accountable to show up. But don't you trust me that I'm going to show up? So, how do those two, sometimes they can be seen in conflict. And so that's why it's really important to talk about, what does this look like in our company? And then if you have that common understanding, now you're still doing something different that goes against their values. Now we're having a different conversation around, okay, how do we either change that behavior, or do we need to have another conversation about you leaving the company? And that's a tough conversation, especially if that person that's having the bad behavior is a high performer. They're getting all their, maybe they're blowing the sales quotas out of the water, or they, making your factory run, super fast, whatever those things are. But, if they're destroying trust and destroying employee engagement, is it worth it? And of course, I would say it's never worth it for the values to lose if that's the only way you can make your business outcomes work.
Yeah, I agree with you too. If it's truly a value that you hold dear for your company, then you can't allow the short-term success to lead to long-term distrust and this resentment from the rest of the people on the team, and because that can spread the rest of the company too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's usually it's not sustainable, first of all. So that great result, it's not going to stay there because people aren't going to want to work with them.
Mhm.
And so that is kind of a short-sighted. It might get you a little way, but it's not going to last.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's probably not a place people want to work either.
No, probably is not. So I'm curious. I want to jump back because you talked about your work as a volunteer firefighter and how that talked to you about leadership. And I'm just curious, what are what was it about what you did? Because you said you did that for about 10 years, right? Yeah, like what was it what stood out to you the most about that role in leadership or just in life that you learned?
Yeah, I think when I first started, the area I lived in was very rural, and we didn't actually have a fire department. And so there were some people in the community that said, hey, let's start a fire department. And some of them, were experienced firefighters from other places. And so I thought, hey, this is, it's a good way to help the community. If our house catches on fire, I'd like to know that there's somebody there that can do something. So part of it was, kind of a need, and, it was kind of interesting to me that, hey, I can learn something here. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And over time, again, there's a lot of learning and training and teamwork, obviously, in something like a fire department, and especially because we were kind of building this one from scratch. So there was also a lot of fundraising and trying to get new members in. So it really was, even though it was a small organization, it was really a startup. We were, we were really, kind of bootstrapping everything and buying our own equipment. And our very first fire truck, we were in the 90s at this point, and the fire truck was probably from the 60s. That was what we could afford. And we were
Okay.
literally firefighters. We were pitching in money to make the truck payment when we first started. So it was really a startup. And then as I look back on that, now, many years later, decades later, I started realizing how the fire service develops leaders, and it's a whole combination of things. It's specific skills like decision making, and if you think who has to make fast decisions, literally life and death at times, it's firefighter and other first responders in our military as well. But firefighting was where I learned these skills. And then you start thinking, well, how do you teach firefighters, many of whom don't have degrees in a lot of cases, which is fine? How do you teach them to have good decision making skills? How do you teach them to be resilient? Because it's long hours and you see things that you really shouldn't have to see as a human. And so you need some resilience there, and you've got to be agile. You're doing training at the middle school and telling kids, how to do stop, drop, and roll and something fun. And then you're, pulling a body out of a car, an hour later. So it's these big leaps. So what I learned, again, kind of looking back, was, oh, how did the fire service develop those skills within people? And there's techniques that they use, and many of them really haven't changed a lot over the past, 50 years. And there's new technology, and there's definitely some new, I think, breakthroughs even in how we deal with stress and anxiety and things. But the fire service was already has a system of how they build people. And so a lot of times I look and see how can businesses apply those types of approaches and help now develop people to do better decisions, especially we're using AI. You've got to make a decision. Is this good? Is
Yeah.
something I should use AI for? Is the information it's giving me correct?
Mm.
They've got to be agile because the world's changing so fast. Technology, politics, finances, everything's moving. Yeah. How can you learn from what the fire service has done and embrace some of those techniques? And again, that systems approach.
Wow. That's a good thought, like how that really relates to everything. Because as a firefighter, like first responder as a whole, it's a high stress environment, and having the right mindset, able to adapt. Like I like how you put it. Like 1 minute you're at an elementary school teaching them about different fire safety techniques. Another one you might be saving someone's life, and it's that that nuance is that's incredible. So I'm wondering, like, as far as you can share, because I know there's a lot that goes into it, especially for the audience that is primarily on the younger side, Gen Z. And I know you mentioned AI, which that's only becoming more and more prevalent. I guess, what are some things that you've learned from the fire service that has really prevailed that is a good starting point to dealing with stress and just being more resilient?
I think there's a whole lot of things, and again, that's why it's a system. But a
Yeah.
few that stand out to me is, first, there's the concept of progressive training. So if you think, at the end, we need to have firefighters that can, even though you're in a team, there's many times it's just, two people, or, sometimes you're alone, but we try to always do things in pairs for safety and other reasons. But, at the end of the day, you may have your orders. Hey, we need to, put this fire out. You guys take a fire line, or ladies, because we have a lot of lady firefighters now as well, take this hose around. But even though you've got your orders that you're following, you still have to figure out, how do I apply it in that moment? Because the person that sent you around the back of that building doesn't know what's back there necessarily. They don't know what you're going to run into. Only you have to deal with that in the situation. And so we start with progressive training. So it's, first, there's a lot of book training. It's, what happens when steel gets hot? How do you put fires out? But then it moves into, let's learn about our fire gear. So how does all this stuff work together and get comfortable wearing that? And then we use that fire gear, and maybe we're just inside our training room, and we black out the mask, and they're just doing a search pattern inside just the classroom. And then finally, now they're getting more comfortable, and now we put them in maybe a live burn, but a training situation. So it could be a concrete building where we control the fire and we can control what's going on, but to the firefighter, they're experiencing smoke and real fire for the first time, but it's a controlled environment. And then finally, they're off and they're going to a real fire, but there's always going to be another trained, more seasoned firefighter paired with them as a mentor and a coach that's going to help them. And so that concept of that progressive training. So the first time the firefighter, I remember the first time I went into a real fire, in the door open by myself and all the smoke and the heat hits you for that split second. There's the, oh my gosh, but then the training kicks in. It's the, okay, that's all right. You're trained for this, move ahead. And if you don't have those experiences in that training to build you up to that point, it's very easy then to panic in that moment, and then bad things can happen. So that, how do you bring that concept of progressive training? And it's not necessarily about the schoolwork again. It's not necessarily about, doing that homework or doing the projects. It's getting those experiences and stepping out, and, you don't have to jump all the way into something, but you do have to step forward into something and try it out, and then do a little bit more and do a little bit more, try something a little different. So that whole idea of building your way up and always moving forward, but you don't always have to make the full leap depending on what the situation is.
I like how you mentioned that you don't have to make the full leap and you're just taking one step at a time. Feel like we're in such a fast-paced culture, and AI has only made that worse, and it's only going to get faster. Like, things never slow down, it only gets faster. But I think it's, even as we're going fast, just making sure we know, just took one step in front of the other, as opposed to trying to look like, okay, where am I going to be at the end of the year sometimes, or maybe the end of my career? Because I know something that I struggled with when I was coming out of college was figuring out, I thought I would come out of college as a chemical engineer. I would know everything about chemical engineering and just dive in and be able to figure everything out. But it's understanding that there's a lot of things you don't know. And that
Yes.
is the beauty of being an engineer, being a problem solver, is you don't only have to use that mindset in engineering. You can use it as a firefighter, you can use it in HR, you can use it in training and speaking, all these different things.
Yeah, and to me, that was also another aha moment I had for myself is, especially as I was growing up, I thought you went to college and you got the degree, and then that was the job you had. I'm going to be an aerospace engineer, so I did a degree in aerospace engineering, or I want to be an industrial engineer, I want to get a degree in industrial engineering. And I think that's kind of what, I mean, maybe I was a little bit naive or didn't really think it all through, but yeah, I mean, that's a credential, that's a learning experience you have, but that doesn't mean that's who you are or that's what job you have to do. And how do you take those skills that you have, whether it's from a degree or from a volunteer experience or wherever it's from, how can you apply that to something that excites you, that you're passionate about, and that, by the way, somebody will pay you for? And that's not always necessarily the same thing as those words that are on your degree.
Matching up your passion with what you're going to get paid for. How have you approached that in your careers? I know you've done a few different things. Can you kind of talk through how things came up and you were pursuing them, or what kind of could you talk a little about it? If I want you to dive a little bit deeper, like how you actually kind of created this path for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, one of the best skill sets I've learned is project management. So I actually got a certification as a project management professional. And to me, sometimes certifications are worth the time and effort. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's just kind of a money-making scheme. And just because you have a certification doesn't mean somebody's not good at something. Having a certification or a degree, it does tell you, okay, they've gone through a certain amount of stuff. You kind of know at least what the baseline is. And I had done that while I was still mostly in that more kind of business improvement, process improvement kind of role before I got into HR. And I just like the structure of project management. And again, maybe that part of that's the engineering side, but that we're going to create something. We need a plan to get there and milestones, and we need to make sure it's resourced. So I kind of like that, I think, just as an engineer. But what I had happened to me is I had gotten assigned to some HR projects, and we were doing some big restructuring projects, and the HR team obviously had the HR skill set, but they didn't have the project management bandwidth to manage these large scale changes that we were going through. So I got assigned as a project manager to the HR team basically to help them, okay, we need to lay out a schedule. What's this look like? And help them kind of project manage the elements that they already kind of knew how to do, but at a much bigger scale. And so for me, that was a great learning because I know the project management parts, but I didn't know the HR parts. So now I'm learning all about how these things happen. How do you drive a communications plan? What is employee engagement? How do you make these things work? So for me, it was kind of a crash course. They're getting some project management support from a skill set they don't necessarily have. And I'm learning all this great stuff about HR that, I never even knew existed. And so for me, it was a great learning to be able to apply, again, that project management skill set to a different thought domain. And then along the way, I got assigned to more and more of those HR type projects and learned more and more. And then that is how I ended up getting into formal HR roles just because I kept learning and I really enjoyed, again, that systems, that industrial engineering, the people engineering side of it, the collaboration. How do you get these big systems of people to work? And it's not enough just to document a process, and it's not enough just to make sure that the tools are working on the manufacturing line. At the end of the day, it's, for the most part, it's people that are making those things work. And so it was like that aha moment of collaboration engineer. It's that collection of people and process and system coming together.
A people, process, and system coming together and making sure that it's in the right order. Because sometimes we don't put the people first and then everything falls apart.
Absolutely. It does.
That's pretty good. So, because I know we talked a little bit about AI, and I don't know why this keeps coming in my head, and maybe this is not relevant, but I'm just curious. When you're working with different teams, what are the questions or things you're hearing more about AI and if they're using it, how to use it? Like, what are some of the concerns and things you're hearing from people, or maybe things they're excited about you're having them work through?
It's interesting. When it first started, there were kind of two groups. There was a group that, yes, AI everything, and then there was the group, no AI at all. And I think now most people have come, somewhere in the middle. You're not going to be able to escape AI. I hear a lot of companies, and it depends on the size and scale, but if you think people aren't using AI in your company, then you're probably wrong. So I think the first call is, make sure you have some policies around how you use AI. When's it appropriate? When's it not appropriate? What systems are you using? What security issues might there be? What type of information can you put into AI for confidentiality? Because that data's probably going somewhere unless you have your own in-house version of an AI tool. So that's the kind of things I hear is, if you don't have some sort of policy or discussion in your company about how you use AI, where it's being used, then that's a great place to start because it is being used in your
Yeah.
company. And if you don't know how or where or what those guardrails are, then you might find yourself in trouble. So that's kind of the starting point, I think. Where's it going to go? I think that's still shifting. Early on, there were some, they predicted, here are the jobs that are going to disappear in 5 years, and those jobs are still here, but we're definitely seeing, job loss being attributed to, we're able to replace it either because AI itself is doing it, or we've just found ways to make AI help us do those jobs faster so you don't need as many of that particular job, which I think is more the case than totally eliminating, a type of job, for at least for now. But the technologies, it's growing and moving faster and faster. So again, if you're not using it a little bit and keeping up to date with it, it definitely could be trouble for you. But it's also not the only thing in town. And I think that's why I keep coming back to those human skills. And I actually had asked a couple of the different AI bots, what skills do people need that are going to make them stand out in a world that's driven by AI. And guess what? It's decision making, it's communications, it's emotional intelligence. It's the things that we as humans uniquely can really own ourselves. And so that's also why I kind of focus on those and had that aha moment about, wow, I actually learned those things from the fire service, which is, in some ways, seems very far removed from AI, although they're actually using some AI in the fire service now. But yeah, it's what are those human elements that we need to grow and really capitalize on? And that's what's going to make a successful leader, I think, is the ones that are able to be the best humans at using AI, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. The best humans are being AI. And I think what at least what I heard is AI is not going to replace good leadership. It really can't replace good leadership because of that human element, the relationship element, the emotional intelligence element of things. And my prediction, and I'm not an expert, and anyone who's making a prediction is we don't know because so much is happening so quickly. But just from how quickly AI has been used and how easy it is for people to recreate and do things, I think in person and the human connection is going to be more and more at a premium to those who
Mhm.
can do it well, because a lot of people are using AI. I don't know if it's the best word for it, but in a lazy way and not
Mhm.
engaging with it to develop themselves. And anytime you're not developing yourself or using parts of your brain, you're going to lose that.
Yes.
My prediction is just like we have gyms that we have to go to build our bodies because we don't have to do manual work for the most part, most people don't. I think we're
Mhm.
going to have emotional gyms because
Ooh.
a lot of the things that AI might take over if we're not careful of, we're going to lose all those skills, but they're inherently human, so we need them. And there's going to be, I don't know what the emotional gym is going to look like, but that's our prediction. It could be in
I
the next 5 years, some sort of emotional gym to make sure we're still
I
good.
tell you, I'll invest in that 100 times more than Bitcoin. I mean, I think you're you're onto something there. It's that whole idea of what you see is the predictions of what jobs that get replaced. It's like the beginning role for a legal analyst or the starting role for the people that are reading your MRI. And I think AI has a lot to add to those things because they can detect things maybe that we can't see as humans as easily. But if those are the jobs that get replaced, how are you building people up to be able to be a leader in that? If they've never gone through some of that, if they haven't paid their dues in some way, then you don't know when to call BS on the AI because I use it a fair amount in the work I do, and sometimes things aren't right or it sounds good, but I know that's not going to work, and it's because I have experience. So I think that's where again that leadership part comes up, that I know enough to know when the AI is good and when it's not good. And the danger is when people don't either have that filter or don't use that filter. They have the ability and they're just, like you said, being lazy and cranking things out. And to me, that's the real risk I worry about, that false sense of I know what's going on, but not really paying attention and just let it run and do whatever it wants to.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Because I think AI is just the next iteration of the shortcuts that we'd like to make as humans. I just remember specifically like in high school, even middle school, when you had to do book reports or read a book and then you like spark notes it to write the report. And yes, you might got a good grade or be able to get through it, but at the end of the day, you didn't learn much of anything than if you had read it yourself. So I think that's what AI is doing, is that it's taking the learning, the striving part out of it. And you can't, like you said, you can't call BS on something that you don't go through the process. And so it's almost, I think it's a vicious cycle because the more you don't go through the process, the more you're going to need AI to help you. And it just gets
Yeah.
more and more until you get to a state that it's maybe a point of no return. And you kind of have to start all over and like, okay, I need something to get back to what it means to be human.
Yes. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Idiocracy. It's look it up, but it's basically a world where government has collapsed, the big companies have taken over, and it's a comedy, but there's a lot of poignant kind of elements there, and it's where people kind of got dumber because the computers took over, and it's far in the future now, and things aren't working, and they don't know how to fix them, and they don't even know how they work, and it's funny, but it's also, it's kind of like, uh-oh, is is it looking forward? And it's, I mean, the movie's probably, 10, 20 years old, I guess, but um, yeah, so maybe look that one up. But it's, again, kind of funny, but also you hold the mirror up, I think, to a possible future for us.
Yeah, a possible future for sure. And yeah, I'm really bad with movies. So the fact that I haven't seen it does not mean it's not a movie a lot of people have seen. It just says
It
more about me.
it was pretty. No, it's a pretty, I think, a niche movie because it is kind of that sci-fi comedy
Okay.
genre. But yeah, it's, I think, just where we are today, it's worth a watch. And
Okay.
yeah, for that, if nothing else.
Yeah, I'll definitely watch that. And the other one is I'm trying not to make this sobering, but I think the more and more we hear about AI, we hear of robots. I think of the movie I, Robot.
But yes,
Yeah, so like it's almost like it's funny, but at the same time, it's like we've seen movies about this. Like we don't have a lot of guardrails in place, and so and I think a lot of people have been clamoring for it. But at the same time, and I was listening to a podcast, I can't remember which podcast it was, is that a lot of people just want to be first and they're not thinking about what are the ramifications about if they do create something like this where it becomes autonomous and takes over and taps into different things. And I had someone on the podcast last year just talking about the importance of having a loving AI and make sure AI understands what humanity means because and I think there's movies about this all the time about like the best way to fix humanity is just to get rid of it.
right.
But so if you don't understand humanity, what it means to be human, you're going to lose those aspects and you have to have some sort of love or morality around it. Otherwise, everything's going to collapse.
Yeah. That's, I love that you brought that up because it kind of pulls together a couple of points I was thinking about. And, I talked about Star Wars earlier and,
Mhm.
what a big impression that made on me at my age, back in that time. And, if I had seen that, if I was young today and saw that for the first time, it probably wouldn't be the same. And the reason is because the setting was so different back then. And I didn't realize it because I was young, but when I look back, that was right after Nixon had resigned. So there was a lot of distrust about the government in general. There were protests going on. We'd gotten out of Vietnam, but there was still that we'd been involved in a lot of wars. We had stagflation, which was where inflation was going up, but there wasn't a whole lot of growth in the economy, at least not for the working people. Gas prices were crazy because we had supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War. So, I mean, as I reflected back, I was like, wow, where are we today? There's a lot of that same kind of stuff, happening, today. And I tried to think, well, what movies could people look to today, that, or maybe, you would look to, or, other kind of the Gen Z group, what movies did they have that would have had that same kind of impact? There's a lot of them, I think, out there, but there was one that came to my mind that also was one that I had some clothing for. So I thought, Buddy the Elf.
Buddy the Elf. For those who are listening, he has the Buddy the Elf shirt on. That is awesome. I had no idea. That's funny.
But it's that whole idea of, he created, hope and joy, and there was a little naivety there. But in the end, there's people in New York City, coming together singing, and, that doesn't happen in New York City, and maybe that would never really happen in reality. But it's the idea that the hope, it's not enough just to create hope, but we actually have to go out there and do something, that makes a difference, that makes that hope real. And so that's why I don't know if there's probably not a lot of millennials that'll say that Elf touched them that way. But, to me, that is that kind of, yeah, how do we make things better for ourselves and for each other?
It's a really good tie. I had not think about that, but it is the action that we take because it can feel overwhelming, can feel like there's nothing we can do, but we have to take action. We have to speak up. We have to do something. It's the people who are crazy enough to think they can make a difference that usually make a difference.
Yeah, that's spot on. If there's that old saying, if you don't do it, who else is going to do it?
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about what I do with this podcast and just trying to impact Gen Z. Because I realized growing up and just being in different roles is that I didn't always have the best leaders. So I wanted to become the leader I always wanted and then connect other people to do the same. And this whole idea of becoming the most incredible version of yourself.
And I mean, that's everybody says it, right? You're the only you that you can be, so be the best you can be. And that's been said, tried, but it's tried and true. I mean, you are the only you that there is. And there's parts of you and your leadership I love and want to emulate, but I'm never going to be you. And there's parts of me that you'll never be able to emulate or be the same. And that's okay. There's going to be some common threads there that we're always going to agree, and then there's going to be some things where we're a little different. But that's okay. That's why we're human and not just AI getting the same answer.
Yeah. This is why we are humans and not AI agents.
At least not today.
Yeah,
I'll try to hold this
not
later.
today. I'm waiting for, and I'm sure someone's already working on having AI agents host a podcast.
Could be the IncrediPaul. No, that didn't work. No,
I don't
no,
know.
that didn't work.
We'll workshop that. We'll also workshop a nickname for you as well. All that branding if you want. I could go on and on about random things. So it's been really great having you on the show.
Yeah, it's been great talking with you, Paul. And yeah, anytime I can sneak, Star Wars, firefighting, and Elf into a conversation, I mean that's a heck of a day in my book.
Yeah. And you got to do all three today. So that's good. It's a win-win-win.
Yes.
But is there anything else as we wrap things up that we haven't got to talk about that you want to talk about or you want to leave with the audience as we close things up?
I think, maybe just, a few words of advice if I can. If you want to be a good leader, take those opportunities. Working on cross-functional projects are a great way to do that, kind of like I did with HR. I'd never thought, hey, I want to learn about HR, let alone work in HR. But by being in that cross-functional project, it allowed me to see, oh, that's what other people are doing. I actually like doing that better than what I'm doing. So take those opportunities to try something different. And if you're in an organization that does things like that, volunteer, get in those projects and see what the other people are doing, and make sure you've got a great mentor or coach that can help you along the way. And YouTube podcasts are great, for self-improvement, but sometimes you need somebody that can look you in your eye, that knows who you are, and sometimes give you that tough feedback. And sometimes we'll need that, or that encouragement. If they're a good mentor and coach, that they should be a combination of both of those things. So that's what I'd like to leave people with today. And of course, make sure you tune in for the next episode of IncrediPaul, because I know you're going to have even better speakers than me coming up.
I don't know about better. I would just say different. I don't think
Different.
anyone's better than another. It's what you need in this moment because
I like it.
yeah, absolutely. But it's been really great having you on the show. Yeah, thanks for the plug for continuing to listen to the show. And I think it's really important what you mentioned about the mentorship piece, because yes, obviously I want people to listen to the podcast, whether it's mine or others, but that connection that we have as humans is something that is never going to go away. We are tribal. We want to exist in community, exist in groups. And that is something that we'll always need. Sometimes we try to replace it, but we always need it. So I think it's
Yes,
really crucial that you're doing it the right way and being intentional about it.
absolutely. Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate getting to talk with you and spend some time with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. I want to make sure people know how to stay connected with you, whether it's your website, social media, however.
So I'd love to reach out. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So you can find me there. It's Chris Whaley, ChrisWhaley. And also have my website is escapetoexpand.com. That's ESCAPETO.
So we'll make sure that is linked in the show notes. And really turning to the audience, I think it's really critical that you understand that the human aspect of things is the most important aspect, because whether you're in a technical career or maybe one that is not as technical, you're always going to have to work with people. And that is something, like we mentioned, is not something that AI is going to be able to do very well. I mean, it can mimic it, but at the end of the day, it knows that it's not a human. And that whole humanity side of things is something that makes you unique. And really from Chris's story, like whatever degree or path that you find yourself on, it is never too late. And there's always something you can learn and do, work cross-functionally, seek out mentorship, do more things to truly be incredible.
Be sure to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform. We'll see you here next time. And be incredible. Incredible.